Hello, this is TGC Requiem with a deck tech for green-red Tron. So, Tron is basically if you get one of all three pieces of the Urza's land cycle together. Urza's Mine, add 1 to your mana pool if you control Urza's power plant, and in Urza's Tower, add 2 to your mana pool instead. So basically, Urza's Mine and Urza's power plant, when you have one of all three lands, these both tap for 2 mana instead of 1 mana. Urza's Tower taps for 3 mana instead of 1 mana. So if you were to get all three of these lands down, say by turn 3, they can tap for 7 mana. So the common play for Tron is Urza's Mine into Karn Liberated, 7 mana Planeswalker who can -3 exile target permanent. There is no non-land restriction there, so you can exile lands from your opponent, which is very powerful. So that is kind of what Tron is known for. So let's kind of dive into the deck a little more. So the goal again is to collect and get these 3 lands together, one of each of the 3. So there's a couple ways the deck goes about doing this. First, there are 4 expedition maps. So a very common play would be turn 1, one of your Tron lands, expedition map. Turn 2, you play another Tron land from your hand, and then typically on your opponent's end step, you would sacrifice expedition map to go get the 3rd Tron piece, dropping the 3rd Tron piece on your step, on your turn 3 rather. The other one, Sylvan Scrying, is a 4 of to search your library for a land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. The trick to this, though, is this requires green mana, and as we can see, we have a lot of colorless mana, including Ghost Quarter and Ivugin, 1 forest, and then 5 pain lands here. Now, technically, Karplusan Forest is a budget version. This deck would be running Grove of the Burn Willows, but I just haven't put that piece into my collection yet. So Grove of the Burn Willows, which is really what you should be playing here, taps for green or red, and when it taps for green or red, you would give your opponent 1 life versus the budget option, which does 1 damage to you. Also, you have Llanowar Waste and Forest. So and Llanowar Waste, some decks don't run that. Some decks run a Karplusan Forest along with the Grove of the Burn Willows. But point being is you give yourself some green options to hit Sylvan Scrying. The other thing you have is you have eggs. The Chromatic Sphere and Chromatic Star are called eggs. Basically, you pay 1 to play it, and then pay 1 and tap it to sacrifice it. When you do that, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, draw a card. Chromatic Star essentially works the same way, except it has the benefit of it draws a card when it goes to the graveyard. So technically, there's a couple different weaknesses to both of these. Chromatic Star, if you had like Rest in Peace played against you, it would not go into the graveyard, and therefore you would not draw a card. Likewise, sacrifice Chromatic Sphere. This only draws you a card if it's sacrificed, whereas Chromatic Star, if somebody were to say Abrupt Decay it, you would still draw a card. So they each kind of have their positives and negatives. In general, Chromatic Star is the better of the bunch because not too many people are bringing in graveyard hate like that against Tron. But the big thing here again is you get 1 mana of any color in your mana pool. So again, you could think of turn 1 Urza's Mining into turn 2 Chromatic Star. You play another land on turn 2, use a mana to activate this, sacrifice, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, choosing green, and then you draw a card, but then you use the green in conjunction with the other land to play a Sylvan Scrying to go get your 3rd land. So those are the two ways you can pick specific lands, and then chromatic spheres and chromatic stars cycle, so you're getting your card back in essence. The other thing is with a green mana, again typically off the eggs or one of these lands, you can do Ancient Stirrings, which allows you to look at the top 5 cards of your library and put a colorless card from among them into your hand. And you put the rest on the bottom. Lands, if you are not familiar or aware of this, lands are colorless regardless of what color they are. So, well, they're almost always colorless. Dryad Arbor may be the exception. But anyway, so Ancient Stirrings, not quite as potent as Sylvan Scrying or Expedition Map for finding the exact land you need. However, it is still giving you a shot at 5. The other thing you have Relic of Progenitus, which just helps against random graveyard decks, but it also allows you to exile cards from all graveyards, which you don't use the graveyard as a resource, but then draw a card. So just another way to cycle. So kind of those are the tools you're using to go find your lands, to get your lands together. The goal is to get, in most games, your lands together as fast as possible so that you can go play something big like Karn Liberated or Wormcoil Engine. Wormcoil Engine just is almost unbeatable by a lot of decks, specifically mid-range type decks that don't play white. White decks do better because they have Path to Exile. Exile being far better than Destroy, because when Wormcoil Engine dies, it puts a 3/3 colorless worm artifact creature token with Death Touch and another one 3/3 with lifelink on the battlefield. So even when it dies, it's giving you 6 power, some lifelink, and Death Touch on the battlefield. So typically Wormcoil or Karn is your ideal turn 3 play off of getting Tron together. However, some decks that doesn't really do a whole lot against either of these cards. Most decks, usually one of these cards can do something pretty heavy. For the other decks, usually Ugin is the other answer, but Ugin can only be hit at 8, which means you can't get him really before turn 4. Although there are some decks that run Explore to try and get extra lands out faster, but that's kind of just, I guess, a choice and typically not very common. Ugin is pretty huge because you can exile -X to exile each permanent with converted mana cost X or less. That's 1 or more colors. So a lot of the decks that this deck, Red-Green Tron or Green-Red Tron, has trouble with are the decks that are kind of low to the ground aggro type decks. And so if you can delay long enough to get Ugin in play, Ugin can wipe the board of your opponent, and that's usually for fairly cheap, so that's pretty powerful. How does one delay long enough? That is where Spellskate and Pyroclasm come in, Firespout kind of as well. Some people are playing Firespout, some people don't. Firespout costs 1 more mana, but it's a little more powerful. Pyroclasm deals 2 damage to each creature. And since you don't play any small creatures that can get hit by this, it's a one-sided effect for the most part. Spellskate just goes down early as a blocker and shuts down some decks like Infect. Infect is one of the worst matchups for this deck. Also, Splinter Twin's a tough matchup, and Spellskate does work there. Oblivion Stone, another powerful 8 mana play. Ugin, again, 8 mana, board wipe. Oblivion Stone, 8 mana, board wipe. So typically, you pay 3 for Oblivion Stone, and then 5 to sacrifice the Oblivion Stone and destroy each non-land permanent without a fate counter on it, then remove all fate counters. Technically, you can put a fate counter on target permanent, but this does not happen a lot. Typically, you're playing it and then ideally blowing it up to kill everything. And it doesn't mean you have to do that the turn you play it. Sometimes putting an Oblivion Stone down really slows your opponent down, which is a big advantage and gives you the time to do what you need to do, assembling Tron and whatnot. Again, Firespout's just a slightly bigger version of Pyroclasm, costs 1 more mana, but it's also restrictive. So if you pay red mana, you're going to do 3 damage to each creature without flying, and if you pay green mana, you're going to do 3 damage to each creature with flying. If you pay both, you're going to do both. So it's hard to really hammer both halves of it. I'm just kind of toying around with it. The other thing this deck has, which I somehow missed it here, plays Emrakul, the Aeon's Torn. Emrakul is just a beast. Cannot be countered. When you cast Emrakul, take an extra turn after this one. The keyword there is cast. You cannot put him from the graveyard on the battlefield to get an extra turn. Or cheat him onto the battlefield with like Court of Calling or something. Not that you're going to chord for 18 very often. He has flying, protection from colored spells. Colored spells does not include permanents, something that often gets missed. So for example, you could use, what's his name, Deceiver Exarch to tap down an Emrakul. Flash him in and tap it down because he enters the battlefield, Deceiver Exarch would, and then chooses Emrakul. And once he's entered the battlefield, he's no longer a spell, he is a permanent. So just something to be aware of. Annihilator 6, basically Annihilator is when you attack your opponent sacrifices X permanents, and in this case X is 6, which is pretty brutal for most people. That could be 4 lands in both your creatures, things like that. The other thing, when Emrakul is put into the graveyard from anywhere, its owner shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her library. 15 mana, that's a lot. So typically, when you cast him, the next turn you attack, your opponent loses pretty much every permanent they have, and that's usually how you end the game. A lot of matchups you're never going to play him, but he is phenomenal against control. He is essentially going to win you the game. Not always, but that's kind of your goal. And to get him, since he's a 1-of, we play Eye of Ugin as one of our 20 lands. And Eye of Ugin is a colorless land. It does not tap for mana, but he makes colorless Eldrazi spells you cast cost 2 less. And you can pay 7 and tap this to search your library for any colorless creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. So you could play this when you have 7 mana available, and then on your opponent's end step, use it to go find a Wormcoil Engine, or say you really needed a Spellskate, or more likely Wormcoil or Emrakul. So that is the main deck. Again, I mentioned the deck has a lot of trouble with Splinter Twin, which is a pretty big deck. Sorry, not Affinity. Affinity is actually not a great matchup either. Burn's not a great matchup. And Infect is a terrible matchup. Excuse me. So that's actually 4 pretty good decks, if you think about it. And so a lot of the sideboard is built around that. There's a lot of hate here in terms of excuse me, in terms of Splinter Twin. So you have Rending Volley, which can't be countered, deals 4 damage to target white or blue creature. Essentially this is for Deceiver Exarch. Also helps against Merfolk. Pyroclasm sometimes really can help against Merfolk, sometimes helps against Burn, can do some work against Affinity, things like that. Nature's Claim, which can do work against Affinity, but the other big thing Nature's Claim does is it destroys target artifact or enchantment, giving its controller 4 life. We don't care about the opponent having 4 life. Typically that's not how we win. We win by basically just locking their board up and beating them down with bigger creatures. Now, the big card that is super good against Tron out of the sideboard is Stony Silence, and so Nature's Claim is a way to beat Stony Silence. Another good card against the deck, considering it's playing primarily colorless lands and all, other than one, all non-basics, Blood Moon. And so again, Nature's Claim can hit Blood Moon. Blood Moon can shut Tron down. So we run 4 Nature's Claims against Burn. It also does work because you can blow up your own artifacts to gain life and offset some of the damage that would have happened. And if you blow up, say, Chromatic Star, because you draw a card when it goes into the graveyard, you would still get to draw a card. You can blow up a Wormcoil Engine to get your token, still keep your tokens. In response to your opponent trying to destroy it, you can blow up the Wormcoil, gain 4 life. It still is destroyed, but at least you gain 4 life out of the exchange. Life from the Loam. A lot of decks will attack your lands with like Fulminator Mages, trying to destroy your lands to keep you off Tron. So Life from the Loam. Sometimes people will play Crucible of Worlds. Crucible of Worlds is a 3-mana artifact, and because it's colorless, it can also be found with Ancient Stirrings. And so some people like to play that, but the decks that it's best against are also the decks that are really good for, or the decks that are people playing Abrupt Decay and Artifact Hate. And so they're already bringing Artifact Hate against the deck. So I play Life from the Loam instead, and it allows you to return 3 target cards from your graveyard to your hand, dredge 3. So basically, you can play it, go get the piece that they just destroyed back into your hand, and if they do it again, you have Life from the Loam to go get it back again, because you can dredge the card back to your hand at your draw step, versus taking your draw. Dredge, in case you don't know what dredge is at your draw step, instead of drawing a card, you can dredge this card out of your graveyard, dredging X cards from your library into the graveyard. And so that's what Life from the Loam is. Thragtusk, just to buy yourself time against more mid-range strategies if you need it. And again, Thragtusk, if you were to bust an Oblivion Stone, you're going to get a 3/3 token left over afterwards. And again, Thragtusk can be decent against Burn. Slaughter Games. Slaughter Games is there for 2 matchups primarily. The big one being Splinter Twin. You can use it to name Splinter Twin, or Deceiver Exarch, or whatever you want to name. It's also really good against Scapeshift. Scapeshift is another bad matchup. To name Scapeshift. And the reason this is so good is because it cannot be countered. You name a non-land card, search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with that name and exile them. Then that player shuffles his or her library. It does require black, which is why we run the 1 Llanowar Waste. We also can get black off Chromatic Sphere, Chromatic Star. A lot of people will think that's kind of tough to get the black, but again, you also have Sylvan Scrying and Expedition Map to go find the Llanowar Waste if you need to. So often you'll have like a Carplusant Forest, or more likely a Grove of the Burn Willows, and then your Chromatic Sphere or Star. Or maybe you have an Expedition Map and you go get the Llanowar Waste, but then you have the combination of colors somehow from there. It's a really powerful card. In 2 matchups you have a really hard time playing or fighting against. Relic of Progenitus, just for extra graveyard hate. The deck is not great against the graveyard. And Torpor Orb, running 2 of, again, creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger, and so this is great. Splinter Twin hate. And there's other decks it does work against, but primarily Splinter Twin, and it's because it's a bad matchup. It's possible getting an extra Spellskate in here would be worthwhile for the matchup against an Infect and or Bogles, things like that. So this is Green-Red Tron, and we'll get some videos up there so you kind of have an idea of how it works.